They told Violet her position was being realigned. In front of a dozen executives, her $120,000 salary dropped to $45,000, just like that. No warning, no gratitude, just humiliation wrapped in HR language. Everyone expected her to cry, to beg, to stay quiet. She didn't. She smiled, walked out, and within months, every company in her field was fighting to license the technology she built in secret. This isn't just revenge, it's justice done right. If you've ever been underestimated, stay until the end. And if her story hits home, subscribe and tell us your moment below. The conference room felt colder than usual, though maybe that was just me trying to keep my hands from shaking. Madeline Cross, our CFO, sat across the table with a smile so practiced it could have been printed. Violet, as part of company-wide optimization, we're adjusting compensation to reflect current market alignment. Her voice had that smooth corporate polish people use when they're about to stab you with data. My eyes dropped to the number on the paper, $45,000, down from $120,000. The sound left my mouth before I could stop it. You're cutting my salary to $45,000? Every head in the room turned toward me like I'd broken some sacred rule by saying it out loud. Madeline's expression didn't flicker. She folded her hands neatly, nodding like a therapist, watching a patient realize the truth. "It's not personal," she said. That line always comes before the ruin. I wanted to laugh, but it would have come out broken, so I didn't. Instead, I stared at the paper, the ink crisp and professional, the words clean and lethal. Around the table, a few of my colleagues kept their eyes down, pretending to read their own documents, desperate not to be witnesses. I'd spent 7 years at Aurora Polymers building their materials division from scratch. Every adhesive formula that kept bridges from crumbling, every contract that doubled their revenue, I'd been behind it all. But now I was just a number on a spreadsheet marked for reduction. I didn't argue. I wanted to see how far they'd take the performance. Madeline started explaining how budget restructuring was impacting leadership tiers. Each word was a hollow note in a song I'd already heard. The HR manager, a woman I'd trained years ago, slid a packet across the table, her hands trembling slightly. Severance for some, salary cuts for others. My cut was the deepest. I wasn't being dismissed outright. No, that would have been too clean. They wanted me to stay, to keep working while they stripped away every reason I'd ever stayed loyal. I took a slow breath and let the silence hang. It was amazing how quiet a room could get when truth entered it. I thought about every late night I'd spent debugging formulas, every holiday I'd skipped because Aurora needed me, and here I was, a liability. "Let me think about it," I said finally, pushing my chair back. The words surprised even me. A flicker of confusion crossed Madeline's face, as though she hadn't rehearsed a response for defiance. "Violet, there isn't much to think about," she said lightly. "This is a company-wide adjustment." I stood. "Then I'll think about whether I want to be part of this company." Her eyes narrowed just enough to betray irritation. I picked up the paper and folded it once, neat and deliberate, tucking it into my bag. My pulse was steady now. The fear had burned off, leaving only clarity. They thought I was trapped. Mortgage, bills, career reputation. They thought humiliation would make me compliant. But they didn't know what I had waiting for me at home, or how long I'd been preparing for the day they decided I was expendable. I walked out of that room not as a victim, but as a fuse already lit. The drive home felt like moving through a fog I could see but not feel. Every streetlight on the way back to the docks shimmered through the windshield, sharp and sterile, like the lab lighting I'd lived under for years. I parked by the old freight building where I rented the top floor, the kind of space that used to store machine parts and now stored people who refused to quit. My footsteps echoed against concrete as I climbed the stairs. The moment I locked the door behind me, the day's noise died, replaced by a silence that felt earned. The apartment was wide, unfinished brick and steel, but behind the kitchen door was the room that had saved me long before I needed saving. I called it my second heartbeat, the hidden lab. 3 years earlier, when Aurora started trimming budgets, I stopped trusting the company's promises of stability. I bought outdated lab gear from auctions and spent every spare dollar building my own workspace. It wasn't glamorous. A 3D bioprinter that wheezed like an old truck, a centrifuge that hummed too loud, shelves lined with hand-labeled vials. But it was mine. Every discovery, every formula belonged solely to me. I switched on the overhead lamp, the light flickering before stabilizing, and for the first time since that meeting, my chest loosened. Here, no one could cut my worth in half. I pulled off my blazer, tied my hair up, and walked to the workstation where rows of petri dishes sat waiting. My research wasn't just theoretical, it was tangible, a gel designed to repair microscopic fractures in structural materials by reacting to environmental stress. Unlike anything Aurora had even attempted, it adapted, healed, and strengthened itself. I'd been told a dozen times that such a thing was impossible, but impossibility was just what corporations called innovation they couldn't control. I documented everything: the timestamps, the material orders, the credit card receipts, even the temperature logs. Tonight, I opened my notebook and wrote the date, the day they tried to erase me. Every failed test, every sleepless night, every quiet success, they all meant something now. I mixed two compounds, watching the chemical reaction bloom like a living thing. The smell of polymer filled the air, sharp but oddly comforting. I remembered how proud I'd once been to see my name on an Aurora project memo buried 3 lines down under someone else's. I'd smiled then, told myself credit didn't matter as long as the work spoke for itself. But work without recognition is servitude, and I'd had enough of that. The solution turned from clear to pale blue, the signal that the reaction held. I tested a sample, applying it to a piece of fractured carbon composite I'd split earlier that week. Under normal conditions, it would take hours to cure. I placed it inside the cold chamber, set it to 0 degrees, and waited. The hum of the machine filled the room while I stared at the frost gathering on the window. I thought of Madeline Cross's calm expression, her deliberate tone, and the way she'd said, "It's not personal." No, it never is to people who have something to gain. When the timer beeped, I pulled the sample out. The fracture line had vanished. I pressed the seam with both thumbs. Solid, unyielding. It had worked. Months of failure, years of trial, and the result was sitting in my hand. A self-healing polymer capable of revolutionizing construction and aerospace industries. I should have felt relief, but what I felt was vindication. This was my proof, my weapon, and my protection. I recorded the test data, stored the footage on 2 encrypted drives, and uploaded the logs to a secure cloud under my name alone. As the last file uploaded, I leaned back and closed my eyes. They thought they'd cornered me with numbers, that I'd fold under the weight of debt and fear. What they didn't understand was that while they measured profits, I was measuring time. Every insult, every stolen idea, every meeting where my voice was ignored, those were hours I'd invested in my own freedom. Tonight, the investment matured. Tonight, I stopped building their future and started building mine. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 weeks before the salary meeting. I walked into my lab at Aurora and found my badge access temporarily restricted, as if the system had forgotten who I was. The security guard, a kid half my age, told me it was a routine update. I smiled and waited for him to fix it, but my stomach tightened. Nothing about Aurora's timing was ever routine. Then came the second sign, budget approvals that vanished in review, project meetings I was mysteriously left out of, emails that used to copy me suddenly skipping my name. You don't need a corporate memo to know when you're being erased. I'd seen it happen to others, their names quietly removed from research decks, their work reassigned, their reputations dismantled before they could fight back. The cruelty wasn't loud, it was procedural, and now it was my turn. I tried to keep my focus on the research, but one afternoon I walked into the break room and froze. Madeline Cross stood by the counter with the VP of Engineering, both hunched over printouts that looked very familiar. My lab notes, my data sheets, the formulas I'd been testing for months. They looked up too late. Guilt leaves a smell. Madeline straightened first, sliding the papers into a folder. "Violet," she said smoothly, "just reviewing some resource allocations." Her tone was light, practiced, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the recognition that she'd been caught. "Of course," I said, keeping my own voice steady. "Let me know if you have questions about my work." She smiled. "Your work?" There it was, the smirk, a tiny lift at the corner of her mouth, sharp enough to slice through every illusion I still had about loyalty. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. In that moment, humiliation turned to strategy. I knew then they were preparing to push me out, but they were underestimating what I had at home. Every note they'd stolen was useless without the missing pieces, the catalysts, the timing, the temperature ratios I kept off-site. The lab at my apartment wasn't a side project anymore. It was my insurance policy. I went home that night and laid everything out on the table: notebooks, test logs, receipts. I checked each timestamp, confirming every test was conducted after hours. I printed invoices for the materials I'd purchased personally, highlighting the ones Aurora had refused to reimburse. I organized video files of every experiment, each one showing the clock on my wall, my own equipment, my own hands. By midnight, the evidence filled a folder thick enough to crush any argument they could make. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I'd moved past fear into something colder. Focus. The next day, I called Harper Liu. We'd met years earlier at a patent conference where I'd presented under Aurora's name. She remembered me instantly. "You finally ready to file on your own?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and I want to do it fast." I told her what was happening: the demotion, the stolen work, the smirk. She didn't interrupt, just listened and asked, "How strong is your documentation?" "Unbreakable," I said. "Good," she replied. "Then we'll file by tomorrow." I hung up and stared at the city lights bleeding through my window. Somewhere across town, Madeline was probably congratulating herself, believing I'd go quietly, believing she'd won. What she didn't know was that every move she'd made had taught me exactly how to fight her. Betrayal, after all, is just data, if you know how to use it. By the next morning, the shock had burned off completely. All that was left was precision. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers, timestamps, photos, and receipts. Years of proof that my breakthroughs belonged to me. Harper called right on time, her tone brisk but energized. "I've reviewed your materials," she said. "You weren't kidding. You've built a fortress." I could hear her typing in the background, her confidence steady. "We'll file 4 provisional patents by the end of the day. 1 for the bioreactive bonding gel, 1 for the corrosion shield, 1 for the adaptive sealant, and 1 for the elastic compound. Do you want them all under your name or an LLC?" "My name," I said. They tried to erase it once. I wanted to stand alone. There was a pause, then a low laugh. "I like you already." I spent the next several hours cross-checking every formula, rewriting descriptions so they were crystal clear, factual, and indisputable. No jargon, no corporate phrasing, just my science, clean and defensible. I signed each document like I was sealing a future I'd already seen. When Harper emailed the confirmation, I stared at the line that read, "Filed, United States Patent Office." It didn't look dramatic, but it felt like oxygen flooding a vacuum. Everything Aurora had dismissed as trivial or too ambitious was now protected under my name. The work they ignored had just become my leverage. I closed my laptop and let myself breathe. The quiet around me was dense but alive. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy you can't sustain. What replaced it was focus sharpened into something lethal. That afternoon, Harper called again. "Violet, it's done. 4 patents filed. You're officially the owner of the technology they tried to bury." The words landed heavier than I expected. "What happens if they challenge it?" I asked. "They can try," she said, "but your documentation is immaculate. The burden's on them to prove otherwise, and I doubt they can afford to bleed that long." She paused before adding, "You're in control now. Don't waste it." That line stayed with me long after we hung up. Control wasn't something I'd had in years. Aurora had fed me praise when they needed my results, silence when they took the credit, and fear when I questioned their motives. But now, every decision, every test, Every dollar I'd spent, all of it converged into one undeniable truth. They no longer owned me. I walked to the window overlooking the harbor, watching the cranes move containers under the gray Boston sky. The company tower where I'd once spent 12-hour days sat in the distance, gleaming like a monument to arrogance. I used to dream about seeing my name on their wall of patents. Now I realized I didn't need their wall. They'd built their empire on my work. Soon, they'd understand what happened when the foundation belonged to someone else. 2 days after the patents were filed, an email from HR dropped into my inbox with the subject line, "Follow-up meeting regarding compensation adjustment." The phrasing was polite, bloodless, exactly how corporations hide their cruelty. I replied with a single word, confirmed, then. Spent the night preparing for my performance. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. There's a kind of calm that comes when you stop asking to be treated fairly and start preparing to win. The next morning I wore a black suit, the same one I'd bought years ago for Aurora's awards gala, where Madeline had accepted a trophy for a project I had built. Today, that suit meant something different. When I walked into the conference room, the air felt thick with discomfort. Madeline was there, along with the VP of Engineering and an HR representative I'd never met. 3 people, 3 witnesses, 1 stage. "Violet, we appreciate you coming in," Madeline began, her tone warm but cautious. "We wanted to discuss your future here at Aurora." I set my bag down and folded my hands. "So do I." She smiled tightly, the kind of smile executives use before they deliver something unpleasant. "As you know, our restructuring is necessary to ensure long-term sustainability. We hope you'll understand this isn't a reflection of your performance." I nodded as if I cared, then opened the folder I'd brought. "I have a counter-proposal." That made her blink. The VP frowned. "We're not in a position to negotiate," he said quickly. "This isn't about salary," I said. I spread the papers across the table, each stamped and numbered. 4 patent filings, my name on every page. "It's about ownership." For a moment, silence ruled the room. The HR rep leaned forward to read the top document, her mouth opening slightly. Madeline's smile faltered. "What is this?" she asked, voice thin. "Licensing agreements," I said evenly. 4 proprietary compounds developed independently on my own time, using my own resources. Aurora has no claim to them, but I'm offering exclusive licensing rights, $50,000 per month per patent. The VP's pen stopped tapping. $200,000 a month? Correct. I slid one document closer to him. The adaptive bonding gel alone could corner the cold weather infrastructure market within 2 years. Conservative revenue projections, $70 million annually. You're getting a bargain. Madeline's composure cracked. "These were developed while you were employed at Aurora. That makes them company property." I met her eyes. "No, these were developed in my private lab. I have receipts, video logs, and signed test records. Everything is time-stamped, every purchase traceable to my own accounts. You can challenge it if you'd like, but my attorney will dismantle you before you reach discovery." The VP shifted in his chair. "Even if that's true, we'd need verification before—" "Then you can buy samples at market rate once the licensing begins," I interrupted. "But you'll be competing with 3 other companies by then." Madeline's face turned red. "You wouldn't dare take this outside." "You already did," I said, "when you slashed my salary and tried to steal my work." I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood. "You've got 24 hours to decide if you want to license these patents or lose them to your competitors. Either way, I'll be fine." The HR woman stammered. "And your position here?" "I'm resigning," I said simply, "effective immediately." The VP stood. "You can't just walk out, Violet. You have ongoing projects. You told me my contribution was worth $45,000 a year. Find someone at that price to finish them." I slung my bag over my shoulder. As I reached the door, I paused. "Oh, and one more thing. Helix Tech already called. They're interested in a partnership. You might want to update your market forecasts." Their faces froze, a silent tableau of disbelief and panic. I walked out to the hum of fluorescent lights, the same lights that had watched me build their fortune. The fear I'd carried for months was gone, replaced by something colder, cleaner. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. I just needed to take back what was mine. The silence that followed my resignation was the kind that fills a room after a storm. Unnatural, heavy, waiting for something to collapse. I half expected them to call security as I walked down the hall, but no one moved. By the time I reached the elevator, the entire floor had gone still. People averted their eyes, pretending to work, but I could feel their curiosity crackling under the surface. I didn't look back. When the elevator doors closed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving free. That night, I sent Harper copies of the meeting notes, my resignation letter, and the finalized patent filings. "They'll come after you," she warned. "Be ready." I smiled. I'm counting on it. Within days, I reached out to 3 rival companies, Helix Tech, Vertex, and Stratos. I didn't pitch them innovation, I offered them dominance. Each meeting felt like pulling a string in a web I'd already spun. The first was with Catherine Wells from Helix Tech, a woman with sharp eyes and an engineer's impatience for nonsense. I showed her the adaptive bonding gel in action. 2 metal plates fused together at below freezing temperatures with no loss of strength. Her jaw tightened in awe. "You're telling me this was developed independently?" she asked. "Documented and filed," I said. "I'm not selling it. I'm licensing it, non-exclusive 20% royalties." She didn't even blink. "Send me the agreement." The next day, Vertex called, then Stratos. Within a week, all 3 had signed on. It was happening faster than I expected. Momentum, once earned, doesn't wait for permission. Harper called with updates between filings, her tone equal parts disbelief and admiration. "You realize what you've done, right? You've just turned 3 competitors into your income stream." I laughed softly. "Good, maybe they'll appreciate my work more than Aurora did." 2 weeks later, Aurora's first move arrived, a lawsuit claiming theft of intellectual property and breach of contract. I read the complaint over coffee, unimpressed. They alleged I'd used company time, company knowledge, and company resources to develop my patents. Harper's response was immediate and surgical. "They have no proof," she said. "Your documentation's airtight. They're trying to scare off your partners." The opposite happened. When word of the lawsuit reached the industry press, Helix Tech publicly confirmed their partnership with me, praising the technology's potential. Vertex followed. Stratus released a statement calling the suit desperate corporate theater. Aurora's stock dropped 9% overnight. Inside sources told me the board was in chaos, Madeline scrambling to reassure investors while the legal department hemorrhaged money trying to keep up with Harper's countersuit for damages and defamation. A week later, my former lab assistant Renee called. Her voice was a mix of worry and awe. "Violet, it's a mess here. They've got 3 teams trying to reverse engineer your formulas and nothing works. Madeline's furious. People are quitting." I pictured it clearly. The panic meetings, the late-night lab failures, the executives pretending they still had control. "How bad is it?" I asked. "They're missing payroll projections and the board's turning on her. The lawsuit's bleeding them dry." I thanked her, hung up, and sat back. I'd imagined this moment for months, but now that it was real, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like inevitability. Aurora had built its empire on exploitation. All I'd done was stop holding it up. When Harper called again that evening, her voice carried a hint of triumph. "The judge denied their injunction. You're clear to continue production." I looked out the window at the city lights reflecting off the harbor. "Then let's begin," I said. Somewhere across the skyline, Aurora's tower still gleamed, but it was already hollow inside, a monument to arrogance waiting to fall. 3 months after the lawsuit collapsed, the first production batches rolled out of Helix Tech's facility under my licensing agreement. The reports came in faster than I could read them. Stronger bonds at lower temperatures, repair rates outperforming industry standards by 30%. Harper called one morning, her voice light for the first time since we'd started. "Violet, they're calling it the Kane effect," she said. Your technology just reset the standard for an entire field. The name made me laugh, though it felt strange to hear my own attached to something that powerful. I'd spent years being the ghost behind other people's success stories. Now I was the headline. Within 6 months, the royalties alone reached 7 figures. I used the money to lease a proper research facility, a 5,000 square foot lab outside Boston with real ventilation, real staff, and equipment that didn't wheeze every time it started. I called it Kane BioSolutions. The sign over the door was simple, but every time I walked past it, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing no one could take it from me. Renee was my first hire, followed by 3 engineers who'd left Aurora when the company started sinking. By the time our first year closed, we had 12 employees, 5 ongoing projects, and contracts with clients across 2 continents. We didn't just make materials, we rebuilt the idea of what a fair lab looked like. Everyone's name went on the patents. Everyone got a share of the profits. Word spread fast, and suddenly I was getting emails from engineers across the country asking how to protect their ideas from the corporations they worked for. One message caught my attention. A young woman named Alana described how her company had threatened to fire her if she didn't sign over her independent research. Her story was painfully familiar. I met her for coffee, listened, and told her exactly what I'd wish someone had told me years ago. Document everything, never sign under pressure, and find a lawyer before you find fear. Harper took her case, and within weeks, Alana's patents were filed under her own name. It felt like coming full circle. Aurora, meanwhile, was disintegrating. Madeline resigned after a disastrous quarterly report, and the company declared bankruptcy soon after. The tower that once symbolized power now stood half empty, its logo stripped from the glass. When I passed it one morning on my way to the new lab, I didn't feel triumph, just closure. The system that tried to break me had collapsed under its own weight. 5 years later, Kane BioSolutions had over 100 employees, offices in 3 states, and licensing deals in 17 countries. We'd grown beyond anything I could have imagined in that dim apartment lab. Reporters liked to call me a self-made success, but the truth was simpler. I was a woman they tried to erase who refused to disappear. Sometimes I still thought about Madeline's smirk in that conference room, the way she'd looked so certain she could dictate my worth. She'd been wrong, of course. No one can measure value they don't understand. As I stood in the bright light of our new facility, watching my team work, I realized revenge had never really been the point. Survival had turned into creation, and creation had turned into legacy. They cut my salary to $45,000. I built an empire worth $40 million. There was a time when I thought loyalty was everything. I believed that if I worked hard, stayed quiet, and delivered results, the system would recognize my worth. It never did. What I learned is that silence in the face of injustice isn't professionalism. It's surrender. When Aurora stripped me of my title, my pay, and my dignity, they expected me to accept it with grace. What they didn't understand was that grace and submission aren't the same thing. I didn't need to shout or destroy anyone to make my point. I only needed to walk away with my integrity and my evidence intact. The truth has a way of surfacing when you build it on proof, not anger. What happened afterward, the lawsuit, the collapse, the rebuilding, taught me that revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's patience, documentation, and quiet competence. The bad actors faced the consequences not because I sought to ruin them, but because their arrogance left them blind to their own collapse. There's a kind of justice in letting people destroy themselves with the tools they used against you. I don't forgive them easily, but I've learned that forgiveness isn't always about absolution. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. It's the moment you choose peace over pettiness, control over chaos. That's where true power lives. In real life, this lesson matters more than ever. Companies, relationships, even friendships can make us believe our value depends on approval, but it doesn't. Protect your work, your ideas, your boundaries. Don't confuse being needed with being respected. And when you're wronged, don't rush to react. Document, prepare, and respond with strategy, not emotion. How to get started today. Write down your accomplishments. Remind yourself of your tangible value. Save evidence of your work and protect your ideas, even small ones. Set one boundary today and hold it without apology. Choose calm when others expect outrage. And if you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, I want to hear your story. Comment below, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes, the quietest revenge makes the loudest echo.